Nyck de Vries had the ultimate Formula 1 job interview at the weekend as he stood in for Alex Albon and was competing directly against Nicholas Latifi, a driver that is at risk of losing his seat. De Vries did an awesome job, scoring 2 points on his debut, but has he now done enough to become a Formula 1 driver? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. A vacant seat. Nyck de Vries has been close to Formula 1 for a while. In 2019, he won the F2 Championship in his third season, and since then he's raced in Formula E, where he won the 2020-21 World Championship with the Mercedes EQ team. So de Vries has been associated with Mercedes, which has been his most likely route into Formula 1. This year he's driven 3 of the 2022 F1 cars, and he's taken part in FP1 sessions for Mercedes, Williams and Aston Martin, so he's got recent experience of driving cars from these regulations. So he's a talented driver and he's involved in the sport. However, he hasn't ever been in a position where he's been the main contender for a vacant seat. The closest de Vries came to a seat was with Williams for this season. Both he and Albon were contenders for the seat left vacant by George Russell, but the team opted to go for Alex Albon instead. In this situation, Williams opted for the Red Bull back driver over the Mercedes one, but given Albon's experience in racing in Formula 1, that decision made sense. Both drivers are talented, but in Williams' position, the sensible option is to pick the driver with more experience. However, now we've seen this year that Albon has comprehensively beaten Nicholas Latifi, just as George Russell did last year. The Williams team are in a position where they don't need Latifi's investment in the team anymore, and as such, there is a chance that the seat will be up for grabs next season. Throughout this year, there have been several rumours regarding who might get that seat next season, with options ranging from Logan Sargent to Oscar Piastri, and even Daniel Ricciardo and Mick Schumacher being rumoured as well. But more recently, the prospect of Latifi continuing for 2023 has been becoming more likely, which for many fans does seem ludicrous. The ultimate job interview. Nyck de Vries has had the ultimate job interview at Monza, as he was drafted into Albon's car for this weekend. Bear in mind that de Vries had competed FP1 in an Aston Martin the day before. The adaptability that the driver showed to get into the car and get up to speed so quickly on Saturday through FP3 was impressive. To add to this, de Vries hasn't driven the Williams car since the Spanish Grand Prix in May, so not only will the car have had a huge amount of development since then, but also the team will have had it set up for Monza this weekend. So again, de Vries had a tough ask to compete at such short notice. But he looked comfortable from the off. He had 21 laps in FP3 and was less than a tenth of a second behind Latifi in that session. The next time out in qualifying, de Vries outqualified his teammate as he took 13th position to Latifi's 16th. This was another great result as it showed that de Vries could get more out of the car than his temporary teammate and ensure that he was the driver making it into Q2. With the grid dropped around him, de Vries would start his first Grand Prix in 8th position, though admittedly there were some faster cars including Sainz, Perez and Hamilton that would be stuck behind him and trying to make their way up the order. It's worth noting here that the Williams car has been lacking downforce all season, and as such they've been one of the fastest cars down the straight. Alex Albon took advantage of this in Belgium, where he was able to keep cars behind him down the Kemmel Straight despite the cars behind having DRS. So as such, Monza was always going to be a strong circuit for Williams, who are a team that have had to take risks in order to score their points so far this season. And looking back at those points results, Albon did all but one lap on the hard tyres in Australia, going for a differential strategy to take 10th position. In Miami, Albon did well to keep his nose clean and took advantage of retiring cars ahead to take 9th. And then in Belgium, as we know, the team opted for a super low downforce setup and actually had one of, if not the fastest car through the first sector, which allowed Albon to keep cars behind him through the race. So Williams have had to try different things in order to sneak their way into the points paying positions in 2022, and arguably Monza was no different. In the race, de Vries did well to know who to let through as the likes of Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton and Sergio Perez all made progress through the field, but through the whole race the Dutch driver managed to keep the Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu behind despite the Chinese driver being right on his tail. Now again, the low downforce nature of the Williams car will have helped de Vries to ensure he wasn't vulnerable to DRS, but it still takes a lot of skill to defend throughout the race. Not only this, but DeVries was in the mix to compete with the likes of Pierre Gasly, who was on the hard compound tyres towards the end of the Grand Prix. In the end, with the safety car, DeVries held on to 9th position, achieving some strong points for Williams and well and truly putting his name in the spotlight for next season. Without the safety car ending, DeVries may have lost a position. He was saying on the radio that his brake pedal was going long, which is usually triggered by overheating brakes. Personally, I think this just shows how much he was having to push through the Grand Prix, and he was really maximising that car's performance in Monza. It's very difficult to know if Alex Albon could have achieved the same or perhaps even more than DeVries through that race, but we may find out in the next year or so. But before I take a look at that, please make sure you hit like and subscribe. Where could DeVries go? So following the ultimate job interview, Nyck de Vries rightly has a lot of attention on him from many different teams. Realistically, there are 3 setups that could look to employ the services of the driver, these being Williams to replace Latifi, Alpine to replace Fernando Alonso, and Haas to replace Mick Schumacher. Based on the current rumours, the Haas team aren't necessarily interested and are potentially looking at Nico Hülkenberg. The Williams option is clearly a sensible one. He knows the team, he's driven this year's car, and he was clearly able to get comfortable over the course of just 2 days of running. Imagine what DeVries could achieve with a full race weekend or even a full season. I think he could be a great match for Alex Albon, as they're both drivers that are hungry to achieve more in the sport and have been denied a spot on the grid in the past. However, this option is clearly not very competitive at this time. Who knows where Williams could have been this year with 2 strong drivers, but it does look like even in the hands of Alex Albon they have the 10th fastest car this year. Sure, there is a chance of being lined up for a Mercedes drive in a few years' time when and if Lewis Hamilton retires, but DeVries would have to prove himself in the long term against many other strong drivers up and down the grid. And this is where the outside chance at an Alpine seat could mean he holds out on making a decision. Alpine are a team that are in need of a driver for next year. They've lost 2 strong competitors in the last 2 months, and they've struggled in their efforts to recruit from outside of their driver academy. Pierre Gasly was looking like a likely option, but with AlphaTauri struggling to replace him with Colton Herta due to super license constraints, this is looking less and less likely. Jack Doohan, the young Alpine driver who's currently 4th in the F2 standings, is looking like a potential option if the Gasly move doesn't pay off. However, DeVries is a proven talent who has driven 3 of this season's cars for different teams. He's also an F2 champion and a Formula E world champion, competing with and beating many ex-Formula 1 drivers in the process. Alpine is a much more competitive team than Williams this year, but DeVries doesn't have any experience with them and would be taking a leap of faith to move to that team. Personally, I also wonder how well he would be treated at Alpine compared to Williams. With Alpine chasing Pierre Gasly, would DeVries be left on a single-year deal until the French team could pair up with their preferred choice, assuming this deal doesn't happen sooner? It feels like this kind of scenario with single-year deals is very unlikely with Williams. Not only this, but DeVries would need to wait until the F3 series is complete, as surely Alpine would prefer to wait for Pierre Gasly, and this would of course leave the Dutch driver in no man's land with uncertainty until we know the answer. But having said this, DeVries has been part of the Mercedes setup, as has Esteban Ocon in the past, who got his long-term drive with Renault after leaving the Mercedes Academy, so there are links between those teams from a driver transfer perspective. So it all potentially comes down to a choice between a known team that won't be as competitive but the driver could build with in Williams, or a team with a stronger car and a setup that could potentially allow DeVries to score more points, compete for podiums and show what he's capable of while risking whether the Alpine team even wants him long term. Personally, I think I would err on the side of caution and pick Williams, where you know you have a strong chance at proving yourself and then maybe even looking down the line towards becoming a Lewis Hamilton replacement. But then again, I'm not a Formula 1 driver. What this whole situation shows is that even some of the strongest drivers in motorsport have failed to be given the lifeline or opportunity to compete and show their capability. Nyck de Vries won his F2 title in 2019 and only got his first F1 drive and his ultimate job interview by chance 3 years later. So who knows how many other drivers may have been left in the same position in the past, and how many more will be left without an opportunity in the future. But there are potential solutions to this, and if you want to learn more about that, then watch this video next.